equitable and democratic multipolar world order is objective and historically determined. It is based on the shift of the center of gravity in international affairs towards global South countries. So we see that new centers of political, economic, social and cultural influence are being formed in Asia, Africa and Latin America, and they are able to make a more significant contribution to overcoming global challenges, and they justifiably demand to take into account their interests. In these conditions, UN is playing an increasing role due to its universal legitimacy and scope of its competence. It is an only intergovernmental structure that is able to ensure the painless transition to multipolarity. This organization and its potentials and capacity are obstructed by the selfish attempts of the Western countries to subdue to its will and to use the organization for settling scores with unwanted states and to replace the UN Charter with the controversial concept of the rules-based world order. In the current situation, the Russian delegation will take vigorous efforts at the UN General Assembly to recover the high status of the United Nations as the main mechanism for governing global policy and addressing global issues. Together with the partners of the global community, we are determined to defend primacy of goals and principles of the UN Charter and the entirety and interconnectedness, and we continue our coordinated opposition to the colonial practices of the West and the Russian approaches to the specific issues. The agenda of the 79th General Assembly session will be described in the corresponding material that will be published on the official website of the Russian Foreign Ministry, and we will provide a link to that in the text of our briefing. I would like to say a few words and to draw your attention to the memorable date. Well, this date is really important today. 23 years ago, September 11th, 2001, the world was shocked by the horrible tragedy. As you know, as a result of the large-scale terrorist attack in New York, Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were destroyed. The terrorist attack was organized by Al-Qaeda terrorist organizations, and the terrorist attack resulted in a large number of innocent civilian losses. The Russian Federation was the first country that condemned this inhumane act and offered assistance and cooperation to the United States. Several hours later, after the international community learned about the terrorist attack, President Putin called on to join efforts of the international community in countering terrorism. Later, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1373 that has established the Counterterrorism Committee as the relevant subsidiary body of the UN Security Council, and this decision has provided a powerful boost and laid the foundation of the multilateral counterterrorism cooperation all over the world. However, later the situation started to develop along another scenario. The collective West, led by the United States, couldn't give up phobias and prejudice of the Cold War and gradually refused, especially after the start of the special military operation, to see Russia as an equitable partner in countering terrorism. This issue was politicized by the West, and they promoted their own narrow and self-serving approaches instead of countering terrorism. The cooperation between Russia and European countries and the United States on countering terrorism was effectively frozen. We don't see from the collective West the real desire to consolidate efforts of the international community to fight terrorism. Quite the opposite. And it is demonstrated by such facts as detonation of Nord Stream pipelines and refusal to work with the Russian side to investigate consequences and circumstances of this terrorist attack. Moreover, the West has taken a line to infringe on the rights and interests of our country in the relevant international organizations and formats, and they are expelling our country from these formats. I'm talking about the suspension of Russia's participation in the Financial Action Task Force, and its participation was suspended for political grounds. They have introduced unjustified restrictions on our rights and powers in the consultations of parties to the Council of Europe Convention on the Prevention of Terrorism and its additional protocol, as well as the Conference of the Parties to the Council of Europe Convention on laundering, search, seizure and confiscation of the proceeds from crime and on the financing of terrorism. More than 20 years have shown that the rise in international terrorism was triggered by the external interference by the West in domestic affairs of sovereign states Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Today, the United States and their allies openly support the criminal Kiev regime that is widely using terrorist methods through the money provided by the West against Russian civilians and the Russian civil infrastructure. After the launch of the special military operation, the West and the Americans have abandoned all the decencies, and they are using foreign mercenaries, including members of the international terrorist organizations, to support Ukraine. From our part, we should take into account the current situation, but nonetheless, we still support the idea that there is no alternative to the collective counterterrorism efforts, with the UN playing the central and coordinating role. We reaffirm our commitment to the interstate cooperation in countering terrorism with all interested parties in line with the developed international legal framework, recognition of the leading role of states and their competent authorities in countering terrorism, and admissibility of using these issues and terrorist groups themselves as a geopolitical tool and interference in domestic affairs and destabilization of regimes unwanted by the West, as well as reject double standards and hidden agendas. We also support cooperation within the framework of the United Nations Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the relevant mechanism, regional anti-terrorist structure of the SCO, BRICS, CIS and CSTO. But, however, I have so many facts about the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime, which are directly sponsored by the US, Great Britain. Kiev regime continues to terrorize Russian civilians in Russian regions. September 3rd, one of the Russian soldiers informed that he witnessed a new crime committed by the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, which is the brutal murder in the Kursk region. In the cold blood, they have shot down a father and his small child. They were trying to leave in a car one of the villages invaded by the Banderites. September 4th, the Russian mass media have acquired testimony of the Russian female on the Ukrainian drone attack on the civilian car, which a family of 6 used to evacuate Cherkasska-Preshna village of the Kursk region. There was also a 2-year-old child. As a result of the attack, a woman was seriously wounded. September 4th, on the Ukrainian internet resources, a video was posted where Ukrainian soldiers were tormenting Russian soldiers in the Kursk region. The investigative committee opened a criminal investigation. September 7th, Ukrainian Nazis shelled a hospital in Horlovka, DPR. 5 people were wounded, including 1 underage girl. September 9th, the deputy chief of the main military political administration of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Apti Alaudinov, told the mass media that the members of the Akhmat Special Forces Unit found action cameras of the Ukrainian prisoner Uvo with a video footage where his fellow soldiers were beating civilians of the Kursk region. September 10th, the armed forces of Ukraine attempted a massive drone attack targeting central Russian regions. 144 drones were launched. All of them were shot down. 20 of them were shot down in the Moscow region. Unfortunately, there are wounded in the Ramenskoye Moscow region. A woman was killed. All of these crimes, the Kiev regime will be responsible for that. It will weigh on their consciousness, but the Kiev regime has no consciousness, and the same could be said about their Western patrons. That's the crime that they have committed. We're talking about their criminal terrorist activities. Russian law enforcement agencies are documenting everyone in each of these crimes, and all those responsible will be brought to justice. We call on international structures not to turn a blind eye to these heinous crimes of the Kiev regime of terrorist nature as well, and to assess them properly and not leave them without appropriate response. And now, punishment for the crimes. There are ongoing efforts to bring war criminals to justice. A terrorist and a diversionist of the Special Forces Unit of the Main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Lubas, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the attempted landing on the coast of Crimea and for the armed attack on the Russian servicemen. Rudik, a sapper of the sniper group of the Special Operation Brigade Azov, was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the robbery and organized by an organized group and for the ill treatment of the civilian population. The prosecution of the DPR has approved indictments against Latvian national Lukši, Georgian and Finnish nationals Rusitashvili, Nodiradze, Arima for the participation in combats on the Ukraine sides, and mercenaries were put on the international wanted list. September 3rd, the Investigative Committee of Russia has brought charges in absentia of massive killings against 4 colonels of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Fedosenko, Hirashevich, Matveish and Hrapach. September 4th, the 2nd Western District Military Court has sentenced the commander of the 27th Artillery Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Hrapach, to the life imprisonment for organizing terrorist shellings of the Belgorod region. September 4th, the Supreme Court of the DPR has sentenced the Ukrainian commander of the snipers formation Velichko to the 25 years of prison for the murder of a civilian in Mariupol. I will highlight and underscore it again. No Ukrainian criminal or their henchmen will be able to get away with their crimes. And now all those who sponsor them, who support them and encourage them to commit crimes. September 6th, Germany hosted the 24th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format. It was attended by Zelensky, and he tried to beg for additional air defense systems, and he tried to persuade its overseas patrons to allow the use of long-range missiles to strike deep into Russia. He wrote in his Telegram channel, such permission to use long-range missiles is necessary to give Moscow an incentive to pursue peace. So doesn't he have consciousness? Doesn't he feel guilty? But what guilt can we talk about when we talk about Zelensky? We should talk about amnesia, loss of memory. It is the Bank of Street, under pressured by the British official Boris Johnson, stopped negotiations with Moscow, negotiations that it asked for. Zelensky signed a decree, or how they call it in Ukraine, that now Ukrainian officials are forbidden to have negotiations with Russia, and now they talk about peace. The response of the West was expectable, but nonetheless, Zelensky was discouraged. By speaking in Italy at the 50th session of the forum in Chernobyl, organized by the local analytical center Ambrosetti, the head of the Kiev junta expressed his frustration with the affairs of the Western partners and the fact that Ukraine cannot strike Kremlin. But nonetheless, the West didn't leave its puppets without new shipments of military assistance. Sweden has announced $440 million, and the United States announced their intention to spend $250 million. And Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands didn't fall behind. They will send rockets for the HIMARS, multiple rocket launch systems, artillery systems, ammunition, patrol boats, and armored vehicles. All of that confirms the Western line to continue the conflict and to exacerbate it, since they have no regard what will happen to Ukraine and Ukrainians. It is obvious that it is fraught with uncontrolled escalation, but yet they don't realize it. Let's hear what the Prime Minister of the Netherlands have stated. During his visit to Ukraine on September 2nd, Dick Hoff approved the Ukrainian shellings of the Russian power stations and oil storages. If you follow his logic, these facilities are not civil infrastructure, since people don't live there. But again, according to him, people don't live in boats, people don't live in trains. People don't live in means of transportation. Probably people in the Netherlands live in the subway. They go there and live in trains. It's so ridiculous. Since, according to Dickhoff, since people don't live in oil storage facilities and power stations, it means that these facilities could be attacked. I need to remind to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands that people don't live in hospitals, schools. I have never heard that people would live, for example, in shops or in other social facilities. Yes, they could work there, they could buy groceries, go there for treatment. They take their kids there, but they don't live there. Such an interesting logic of the Netherlands, but at the same time, when the armed forces of Russia have attacked military targets, in particular the training center of the military communication specialists in Poltava, have caused outrage, outcry and hysteria among Kyiv supporters. Earlier, they would talk about double standards, but these are not double standards. This is the over-the-top cynicism. We have recorded new illegal crossings of the Russian border by the Western journalists during the press tours to the Kursk region of Russia organized by the Banderites in particular on September 1st and 4th. Tendentious reports and publications praising the pseudo-humanity of the Ukrainian soldiers that invaded the Kursk region were published in the Swiss Resources Neue Zürcher Zeitung am Sonntag, our Gauer Zeitung, and they were written by Peldin Match, and the same materials were published at the Australian ABC company by Dixon Yank.
But what a shame. The aforementioned Pelda couldn't help but publicly complaining Kyiv censors. They forbade him for publishing 5 photos and videos showing a civilian car that was destroyed and a postal bus whose wheels were removed. Of course, we're following all these reports, and law enforcement bodies are now investigating the way how those reporters came to the Russian territory, and they're making decisions according to the Russian legislation. And I can I should mention that on the 6th of September, the National Museum of the History of Ukraine opened an exhibition called Beyond One's Native Land. It's dedicated to the defense operation of the AFU in the Kursk region. The exhibits include, for example, broken nose, barbarously destroyed, of a barbarously destroyed monument to Vladimir Lenin, destroyed by Banderites, military insignia and patches and stage photos taken at gunpoint. They're aimed at dehumanization of civilians in our border areas. At the same time, the exhibition's organizers attempted to justify historical claims of the Kiev on the Kursk region. They argued that this region of the Russian Federation allegedly was the northwestern part of the biggest historical and geographical region of Ukraine, Slobozhanщина, from time immemorial. That was a quote. To be even more convincing, they referenced some artifacts of Ivan Mazepa epoch. The Cossack colonization, they said, or liberation war, quote-unquote, of the beginning of the 20th century. Well, it's like a nut house. This exhibition demonstrates an only thing, the real meaning of this reckless scheme of the AFU. And to my mind, that's the truth that they hide from those drafted to the Ukrainian army. I don't have any other explanation. That's atrocious and tragic and comical at the same time. Just to imagine that anybody would really believe in those long-term objectives of the Kiev regime on this Russian territory is impossible. This is just a PR action, like a promotion that Zelensky needs to pay off the money that he receives. One of the crime, it's a testament to the crimes committed by Benderites on our territory. Now, on the so-called mobilization on Ukraine and on desertion. Well, there's a staggering number of desertion cases in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are still forcefully drafted like cattle for slaughter. Well, they're drafted to thinning ranks of the AFU. The internet is replete with reports and videos of eyewitnesses there saying that they saw employees of territorial recruiting centers beating conscripts. Those people hunters are like fascist auxiliary policemen and Ukraine collaborators during the Great Patriotic War. This lawlessness is causing even more hate among the population. We've seen an increasing number of cars set on fire belonging to the employees of these centers. They're being attacked by cold steel and firearms. It's like a Hollywood film about a bloody Joker, a clown with a bloody smile. A clown that was just randomly came to power. People paid a lot of money for it, and he's just joking, laughing at people. That's what Zelensky is like. But the scenario was written in Hollywood, in the US. The fate of a forcefully drafted is tragic. Captured Ukro Nazis confirm that the leadership of the AFU is feeding the soldiers into the meat grinder, and who refuses to go are just shot on the spot. They parasitize on their own people. They're deliberately destroying the Ukrainian people. And against this backdrop, the Zelensky regime seriously considered the creation of a ministry of returning Ukrainians from abroad. It's like a comeback ministry, so to speak. The collective West, requiring output for their help, would approve of this initiatives. Well, they have to create an impression, maybe to capture some Ukrainians who want to voluntarily come back. Recently, the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, said that Ukraine hasn't had a massive mobilization yet. Johnson said they're not drafting guys younger than 25 years old, but Boris Johnson would like to see that. Ukrainian media say that initiatives to lower mobilizations are already underway. It's obvious that the Kyiv regime received some recommendations from beyond, and these aforementioned facts confirm the relevance of the goals of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, eliminate threats coming from its territory, and the goals that the Russian government said would be certainly fulfilled. Let me talk about the 8th of September. Donbass celebrated the 81st anniversary of liberation from fascist invaders. In 1943, the offensive of southern and southwestern France was possible thanks to the success in the Battle of Kursk. During the offensive, the Red Army crushed 13 enemy divisions, and in Donbass was the place where the springboard was created for liberating the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. On the 22nd of September 1943, the enemy was pushed beyond Dnieper. The Soviet troops were liberating these lands and were pushing the enemy back. On the 22nd December 1943, the enemy was pushed beyond Dnieper. And as a result of this fighting, 66,000 Soviet soldiers and officers died, and more than 200,000 were wounded. But history repeats itself always. In 1941-43, there were flags on buildings in Donetsk, flags of fascist Germany and Ukrainian collaborators. Today we're fighting against their ideological successors. And now, as well as like back then, on the battlefield we'll see military equipment burning. We are wishing, all of us, the fastest and decisive victory over Nazism. Now, to Moldova. we see this catastrophe that the West tried in Ukraine already. The anti-Russian rhetoric is taking increasingly grotesque forms as presidential elections planned for the 20th October and the referendum on joining the European Union approach. On the 3rd of September, Foreign Minister Mikhail Popshoy said that Russia is putting Moldova to the test and is harmfully affecting it. On the 5th of September, Maria Zakharova said on television that the Kremlin, which I find funny, supposedly spending $2 million a month to vilify her image. Well, dear Maria Zakharova, everybody knows that it's not possible. This money would only suffice to improve your image just a little bit. But you know what? I have my doubts that this money would be enough. But to vilify your image, as you say, we don't need any money. It's not possible to do. What you did, you worsened your image to the point where it's not possible to go even deeper. In Moldova, there is a fight against dissent. The independent media in opposition are being persecuted, and the grading system of education is taking form. The Moldavian Ministry for Education threatened to reconsider the financing of those education institutions where, during the beginning of the new academic year events, opposition politicians took part. Well, how do you like that? One teacher was audited. After that, she refused to glorify a bright European future. There is a continuing persecution of priests of the Moldovan Orthodox Church. They are being accused of ties with Russia because of their pilgrimages to Russia. There are calls to, quote-unquote, involve competent bodies. This issue is just absurd. The Moldovan Orthodox Church is a part of the self-governing part of the Russian Orthodox Church and maintains ties with the Moscow Patriarchate. It's okay, it's normal. Maria Zakharova divides people into loyal and disloyal ones. And it's made based on confessional affiliation and place of residence. At the end of August, Moldovan banks said that they would stop working with the only payment system which allows for transferring money between Russia and Moldavia. Those Moldavians working in our country lost the opportunity to help their family members in Moldova. Those people, those Moldovans who come to Russia and get an opportunity to work here, get their money, get their paychecks, and send their money to their homeland. That's who Maria Zakharova attacked. A lot of people left Moldova, working population people. Experts prognosticate that by 2030, number of Moldovans born abroad will exceed the number of those who was born in Moldova. At the same, who's to blame, Maria Zakharova? At the same time, the authorities pretend that the depopulation does not happen. But the spokesperson of the government, the citizens do not leave Moldova for good. What do you think they're doing? The Moldovan government thinks that they're just, traveling. It's not a surprise that the negative ratings of the Moldovan leadership are at an all-time high. Latest surveys show that 57% of the population have a negative attitude to Maria Zakharova. 60% of the people have a negative attitude to Prime Minister. 63% have a negative attitude towards the Speaker of the Parliament, and 75% of Moldovans are sure that ruling party politicians are corrupt, and 69% think that the justice system is now controlled politically by the authorities. They're not trying to recover the economy, improve the well-being of the population, but they're organizing an endless series of visits to the Republic of high-ranking emissaries from the European Union countries who praise the Moldovan leadership for some kind of successes that nobody sees except for them. They shake their hands, they tap them on their shoulders, and thank them for the stability in the Republic. Well, maybe that's some kind of stability where there is no economic growth, no development of science, of education. Well, that's their kind of development, we see that this Western story that repeats itself year after year in different parts of the planet does not work. We call upon Moldovan authorities to abandon the Russophobian policies. Listen to your people. You still call them Moldovans, not Romanians, but maybe it's just a matter of time. Maybe you really hope that you can do more in your hate towards everything Moldovan, taking into account that you rely upon a certain political force fighting for the humanization of Moldova. Well, let me say this. The people entrusted Moldova with their fate, with their life. Those are people who promised to take care of Moldovans. But it turns out that the Moldovan authorities only care about two things. Firstly, about the West, because they get money from them, and about themselves. That's it. Now let's talk about the West. We heard the reports about MI6 and FBR. We heard reports. There was a weekend festival. Weekend festival. It was. We heard accusations towards our country, destructive attitudes towards Russia and their intentions, and they're going to pursue escalation and international tensions. In particular, they both said that, quote-unquote, the offensive of the AFU caused some sort of doubts in Russian elites about the certain situation. And they also noted that it would be not correct to confuse the strong authorities. The Kursk offensive would lead common Russians to a war. They don't know what kind of data they use, MI6, FBR, it's hard to say. Maybe the Kiev regime is giving them fake news. Well, could you please pass those words when you hold a next festival with the participation of intelligence services of Britain and the US? After this invasion into our country of the Kiev regime, and we understand that now we're talking about Western countries first and foremost. What was the quote again? The Russian elites, common Russians, were deprived of their illusions, what Washington and London believes in when it comes to our country. And the US and Britain said themselves that they want to inflict a strategic defeat upon Russia. And it was actually implemented through the strikes in the Kursk region. So please don't have these illusions. MI6 and FBR say allegedly that somebody has sympathy for the Western countries. No, it's not like that. There was a strike on Ramenskaya. We understand that the Kiev regime is just a tool. It's just a proxy that is being used by Washington and London. Let's take MI6, CIA. Is there some kind of a legend that our citizens don't understand who is behind all of this? Is it really true that somebody thinks that somewhere in the British or American intelligence services, somebody thinks that people don't understand that that's the West who's behind all of this? They do their utmost that the Kiev regime and their hirelings can commit terrorist acts against Russian citizens. Everybody understands everything. William Burns said some comments on Russian president. He was smart enough to reference in a murder attempt on Skripal in London. He said Russian spies are more reckless in Britain, in other places, and Russian intelligence services, well, getting their act out of hand. Where they're still referencing the Skripal case, maybe they can show them. We hope that British intelligence services are still close to reality, understand what's happening, and know where the Skripals are. You know that the American and British intelligence services try to destabilize the internal situation in our country. If somebody hopes in Britain or in the US to use the so-called non-systemic opposition in Russia, who obviously work not as agent of influence, if they try to encourage that opposition, so that they organize some violent protests and so on and so forth, well, in this case, I can say that this will not happen. This is a miscalculation. The Russian society understands pretty well what the goals are of this activities by London and Washington and all their satellites. And the Russian society only consolidates itself in front of their enemies. We don't have any doubts that all the terrorist acts committed in our country are committed by the US, Britain, and NATO countries. I would like to say some other word, but I would say community. Okay, we understand pretty well that the collective West declared Russia its main enemy. The Great Britain and US will continue to use all tools at their disposal to fight against us. The feeding of Kiev regime, to pumping Kiev regime by warfare will continue until they can fight until the last Ukrainian. And we see that the intentions of the Anglo-Saxons are to switch our country off, to diminish our powers, and to make it according to their own template. This will not happen. We have warned British officials, American officials, the heads of the diplomatic missions, that the interfering into our actions is not allowed. Interfering into elections and subversive acts will be prosecuted, and the persons could be designated persona non grata and deported from the country. What does it mean when they say so? Anglo-Saxons have consolidated their efforts against our country. They are using the Kiev regime to implement their geopolitical objectives. And these are those powers who form these aggressive policies in the world.
That's precisely they who formed the concept of the military defeat on a battlefield, which will fail. And they are supported by the Finnish president. Attention has been drawn to another string of anti-Russian statements by the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, who is in a radio program An Hour with the President, spoke on Russia as the number one threat to Finland. He also admired by the courage of the Finnish mercenaries fighting as a part of neo-Nazis Ukrainian formations. So he's being admired by the Finnish mercenaries fighting against Russia. We will remember and we will remind Alexander Stubb his own words. Time permits. Such Russophobic maxims, which have become the norm for the Finnish authorities of late, make us think how hypocritical were the calls for the good neighborliness and building a united Europe without dividing lines on the basis of taking into account the interest of all states of the continent. If he would say that it was till 2021, so we will remind about Madam Merkel and other politicians the words about Ukraine. By deciding to join NATO, Finland has become one of the small non-decisive member states of the alliance. It can only follow the path of the Baltic states, whose entire independence in the wake of policies dictated from Washington and NATO Brussels is reduced to inverting new anti-Russian narratives. Talking about the Russophobic in the territory of Finland, we would like to draw your attention in Imatra, Joensuu, and Vapenranta. This school, or these towns, used to develop ties with Russia. Finnish tabloids, citing certain sources in the field of foreign and security policy, accused the school of creating a quote possible threats to national security. Once again, there are calls to close these institutions, and it should be particularly emphasized that the school in question is a Finnish school with Finnish curricula. Such accusation didn't stop who are looking for another anti-Russian pretext in order to pursue this Russophobic policy. Such accusations could be regarded as ridiculous and unimportant. What threat to national security could school children pose? However, we regret to note that the forces for whom the word Russian is equivalent to the word hostile and aggressive. basis of taking into account the interest of all states of the continent. If he would say that it was till 2021, so we will remind about Madam Merkel and other politicians, the words about Ukraine. By deciding to join NATO, Finland has become one of the small non-decisive member states of the alliance. It can only follow the path of the Baltic states, whose entire independence in the wake of policies dictated from Washington and NATO Brussels is reduced to inverting new anti-Russian narratives. Talking about the Russophobic in the territory of Finland, we would like to draw your attention in Imatra, Joensuu, and Vapenranta. This school, or these towns, used to develop ties with Russia. Finnish tabloids, citing certain sources in the field of foreign and security policy, accused the school of creating a quote, possible threats to national security. Once again, there are calls to close these institutions. And it should be particularly emphasized that this school in question is a Finnish school with Finnish curricula. Such accusation didn't stop who are looking for another anti-Russian pretext in order to pursue this Russophobic policy. Such accusations could be regarded as ridiculous and unimportant. What threat to national security could school children pose? However, we regret to note that the forces for whom the word Russian is equivalent to the word hostile and aggressive We provided school buses equipped with all modern safety standards. This action was a continuation of Russia's efforts to promote the development of Kyrgyzstan, and each bus is designed for 20 passengers and will transport children to schools to remote regions of the Republic. The new transport was provided by autonomous non-profit organization Eurasia on a free basis with the framework of the project Eurasian Lyceum. Its goal to form a network for schools, and it is also envisages exchanges of modern educational methods, school renovations, teacher internships. And now about another important event. As you know, the 10th St. Petersburg International Forum of United Cultures takes place from 11 to 14 September. The slogan of this is Culture of the 21st Century, Sovereignty or Globalism. This Forum of United Cultures is the authoritative platform for discussing the most topical issues. Artists, representatives of state authorities responsible for culture, business circles, and mass media from all regions of the world exchange opinions on issues of the world cultural agenda on an equal and mutually respectful basis. The program consists of 7 sections: theater, cinema, museums, circus, business culture, media culture, music culture. In addition, there will be 3 sessions touching upon more general conceptual issues of development not only of the culture but also society as a whole, the right to heritage in a multipolar world, artificial intelligence, cultural heritage. Since 2015, the forum has been held under the patronage of the President of Russian Federation. Significant events will be included in terms of lecture by Patriarch Kirill. In total, more than 250 events are planned, including a concert of United Cultures, the BRICS Cultural Festival, a concert of groups from CIS countries, and the Boris Yeltsin's Ballet, Crime and Punishment. The Baltic offensive operation was held in 1944. It is 80 years of this operation. The main target was the liberation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The offensive involved troops of Leningrad, Baltic, and Belarusian fronts, as well as units of the Baltic Fleet and long-range aviation. The overall coordination of actions was entrusted with Marshal of the Soviet Union Alexander Mikhailovich Vasilevsky. In total, 900,000 Red Army soldiers were involved in the operation, including the 16th Lithuanian Rifle Divisions, 8th Estonian, and 130th Latvian Rifle Corps. The struggle for the Baltic was extremely fierce. The enemy, having a well-developed road network and infrastructure, actively maneuvered and resisted stubbornly. On September 14, 1944, the troops of the Baltic Front, after artillery and air preparations, began the offensive in Riga direction. Over 3 days, they covered around 50 kilometers. They liberated Tallinn. On September 27th, the landing operation on Malzun Islands began, which ended with the suppression of the enemy forces and establishment of control over the entrance of the Gulf of Riga. As a result of this advance of the Red Army, Riga was liberated from the invaders by October 15th. As a result of these Baltic operations, Zel, Sirva islands were liberated, and they were pushed down to Kurland's peninsula. Practically, the occupants were moved out of all Baltic states. 131 units information received the honorary name of Riga, Tallinn, Volga, and other. And the longitude of the front was reduced, which liberated a lot of forces to start the liberation of the Eastern Europe. Now I prepare to take your questions. We have what is the position of Russian Foreign Ministry on the statements of the Speaker of Armenian Parliament, Simonyan, that Yerevan should think about the presence of Russian border guards on the border with Iran and Turkey? I've seen this news, these replies. Alena Robertovich didn't follow very closely the last press conference of the Armenian Prime Minister. I would like to remind that the basic document regulating the activity of our border guards in the Republic is bilateral treaty on the status of the border troops on the Russian Federation, which was concluded on September 30th, 1992. Moreover, it has an open-ended character. For more than 30 years, Russian border guards have been guarding the borders of the Republic together with their Armenian counterparts, and in particular by preventing illegal crossings of the Armenian border and stopping drug trafficking attempts. Between the border guard services, we see a truly large-scale and productive cooperation, which a bit of nerve for some forces. In our view, if one were to ponder the experience of the Russian border guards staying on the border of the Republic, one should take into account how the inundation of the borders will affect the security of the country. And when people which are not the experts by the profession are freely pondering about this topic, probably we need to give a floor to those who put their lives at stake and who truly defending the border with arms in hands and without talking about the frontline operations. Probably they should have the last word. That would be of a big value. Thank you. Maiden TV channel, please.
Hello. Yes, hello. Can we talk about the full-fledged strategic partnership with the Arab countries, take into account when the largest American military bases are deployed on their territories? Will it affect the cooperation between Russia and Arab countries? I would like to separate these two aspects. Our relations with the Arab world, as well as with the countries of other parts of the world, are developing on the consideration of interests of one another. In contrast to the West, we do not impose anything. We do not dictate with which countries they should develop friendly relations. These are a position that is elaborated simply, but you can find all the details in our conceptual documents. Thanks to that approach, we could establish truly friendly relations with the countries of Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And we're talking about the centuries-old ties with these countries. At that period of time, when the United States was not even present, and people haven't even heard of the United States in that period of time, we continue to develop cooperation with our partners. We are exchanging delegations intensely. We are developing trade with these countries. That's first. And second, the presence of American military bases doesn't allow many countries of the region to develop relations with countries which they would like to develop their relations. You can see that sovereign states, when the region that you mentioned, when they raise the question of the withdrawal of the American forces, they cannot achieve that. We have seen so many cases where Americans have differently introduced their forces to the region. In some cases, territories were invaded. In some other cases, troops were sent to protect different mineral resources, but these forces don't want to leave these countries. US armed forces like regular forces, mercenaries, private military campaigns should leave these countries. That's what these countries believe in. And when these countries, due to different reasons, end up in the situation when they're occupied by the US forces, they need to realize what it could lead to in the future. I'll just cite you an example. Germany likes to speak about itself that they have a democratic history and the developed system. They have a large military base of the United States that is deployed there, and it is deployed there, as they said, with a view to ensure security of the country. But now Germany is deprived of Nord Stream pipelines 1 and 2. That's the result of the presence of the American soldiers, and there was even wiring, and they were listening and recording everything that the German chancellor was saying. So that's the answer to your question, what American soldiers and armed forces are doing in the countries and regions where they are deployed, and it is applied to every country, to every region where the United States is present. Anadolu agency, please. Thank you. Hello. We have only one question for you. What is the position of the Russian Foreign Ministry to the murder of the Turkish activist Ayşenur Özgi during the anti-Israeli demonstrations in Nablus, in the West Bank? It's a tragic incident, and we regularly and intensively have been speaking about it since the beginning of tragic events and since the unprecedented crisis started in the Gaza Strip. It should be de-escalated, it should be settled. The ongoing violence in the Palestinian enclave is a fact that should be understood, and something should be done. The ongoing violence in the enclave leads to the escalation of violence in other Palestinian occupied territories and in the Middle East at large. The ceasefire should be introduced, and humanitarian assistance should be delivered to Gaza residents, and only through that we could prevent escalation and to prevent all the necessary conditions for the launch of a political settlement process based on the existing international legal framework. Ria Novosti, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Today we have only one question. Yesterday, information appeared in mass media that London could lift sanctions imposed on Moscow if they would be proved to be ineffective, and later the British embassy refuted this message. Well, probably they have read something that wasn't even in the press release. If you read the press release carefully, you'll find the typical British arrogance and mentorship, but the sanctions pressure of Great Britain hasn't changed. The approach hasn't changed, but you'll find what the real situation, which is in the ineffectiveness of the sanctions pressure. Sanctions are ineffective, they're counterproductive, even for those who impose them on Russia. It should be recognized by Great Britain, it should be admitted by Great Britain that the sanctions pressure of Great Britain is a failure. But since they have these questions asked, they have to answer them, but they are doing it in a clumsy way. Verelk, please. Verelk, please. Well, they're not there, as I can see. Is Vestia, please? Hello? We have two questions for you. The Republica newspaper, referring to a source of the German government, wrote that Olaf Scholz was preparing a plan of the settlement of conflict in Ukraine that doesn't rule out the transfer of a part of Ukrainian territories to Russia. Is Moscow ready to consider such peace initiatives of Germany, and what the changed rhetoric of European politicians is indicating? These are leaks, and there is nothing to comment, to be honest. But usually, in general, when some messages emerge, when peace initiatives are being developed, we have always expressed our gratitude for searching ways, for making attempts to find ways to settle the issue. But to be honest, such attempts won't be commended, and they couldn't be viewed as laudable initiatives. Olaf Scholz is sending money and military shipments to Kiev. How this person could talk about peace without deceiving the international community once again? His predecessor said that Germany was not going to implement the Minsk Accords. The real factor that would prove that the German approaches and the German position are put in line with the political settlement in Ukraine would be suspension of military supplies to Kiev. At the same time, they should condemn terrorist attacks committed by the Kiev regime, and they should stop sponsoring the Kiev regime and they should support the outright Nazi ideological beliefs that are being implemented by the Bankover Street through the money provided by Germany. Once all of that is implemented, we can finally read their proposals without snickering, without smiling at them. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a whole series of interviews and remarks and responses and answers by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov when he talked about some negotiating formats, negotiations, talks, etc. We would like to underscore especially what Sergei Lavrov said. We're just trying to cast aside all the leaks that are being made, because we haven't received any information, any material from Germany. So talking about the subject matter, talking about the substance, without talking about negotiations themselves, we would like to emphasize the statement made by the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He spoke about it at length. Russia has always expressed its readiness to have talks, and Russia has never refused such an opportunity. When Ukraine asked for negotiations in 2022, no Russian official has ever said that negotiations are not a priority of Russia. And I would like to recall that the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of the Donbass residents, preservation of their history, traditions, religion, culture, the preservation of the true values that the illegitimate and violent Kiev regime is trying to destroy and is harassing, is bullying the Donbass residents for that. Since the West is protecting such fundamental values, but with regard to Ukraine, with regard to the Russian regions, for yet unknown reason, Europe is taking another stance and prefers to be silent. Well, since again we're talking about the settlement of Ukraine and realities, these are the main objectives that I've mentioned already, as well as to ensure security of our state. All the federal subjects of the Russian Federation should not be a part of the negotiation. Thank you for this detailed comment, and we have another question for you. President of Turkey, Erdogan, stated that the return of Crimea to Ukraine is required by international law. Again, could you repeat that? Return of Crimea to Ukraine. No, wait. We can put a stop here, because I have just already answered your question. I told you already that Russian regions are part of the Russian Federation. You can read our constitution. And Russian regions cannot be on the agenda of these negotiations. Is it going to affect bilateral relations of Russia and Turkey? We have been hearing that from different Turkish officials, from the high-ranking officials, from Turkish experts. All these years we have been communicating our position to the Turkish side through official channels. We have been expressing our position publicly. They are aware of of our opinion, what we think about it, so that's enough. Media Corporation of China. Hello, thank you. We have two questions for you. First, according to the Japanese newspaper, the Japan Time, the Typhoon intermediate-range missile systems of the United States will be deployed on the Japanese territory, but their deployment was banned by the U.S.-Russia treaty on the intermediate and smaller range missile signed in 1987. After the treaty collapsed, the United States started to deploy such systems in various parts of Europe and Asia Pacific. What is the goal of the U.S. attempts to deploy intermediate range missiles beyond their country, and how it can impact the situation in the region? We have been discussing this topic with the Chinese colleagues, and I think that Russia and China have similar views and approaches to the issue that could be confirmed by the statements adopted by China at the highest level. The goal of the American deployments is apparent. The advanced deployment of various missile systems is carried out as part of their comprehensive efforts to project force on Russia and China as part of their double deterrence strategy proclaimed by Washington. It is clear that at the same time the Americans are fulfilling the objective to exert pressure on some other unwanted countries. The consequences are clear, and they are destructive and devastating for the regional and global stability, and they will lead to the growing tensions, and they will provoke arms race. It is clear that emergence of additional and significant missile threats to Russia and to China, our countries will have to respond to that. And the response won't be political, not only in political space. No one should doubt that our country, first and foremost, our country, Russia, but since you're asking the question, since you represent the Chinese media, I'm sure that China won't allow the impact to the national security and defensibility as a result of the American deployments. In this context, I would like to recall the Russian and Chinese understanding that was voiced by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that both Moscow and Beijing will respond with double resistance to the double deterrence on the part of the United States. According to US statistics, since the escalation of the Ukrainian crisis in February 2022, the general volume of the American military support to Ukraine exceeded $56 billion. The recent document published by the US Ministry of Defense on September 6 shows that during that process, 35 federal states of the United States have received contracts with a total sum of $41.7 billion. Moreover, American military giants like Raytheon and General Dynamics have signed multi-billion contracts to manufacture weapons with the Ministry of Defense of the United States. What do you think about the successes of the military industrial enterprises of the United States? Yes, I would like to quote Thomas Joseph Dunning and his phrase that he said. Usually they say that this phrase is attributed to Karl Marx, but that's the words by Joseph Dunning. I know was here an Englishman, but he was British. At that time he stated, and I quote, ensure 10% of proceeds and capital would agree to any use, and if 20% the capital will be active, if 50% of income they are ready to break their head, and with 100% of income they will trample on every law, and with 300% of proceeds it would risk any crime, even if they would have to be executed for these crimes. And there is another phrase. It sounds like a warning, and it was said by the former president of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, in 1961. And he was speaking about military-industrial complex. In governmental circles in the United States, we have to resist the situation when the military-industrial complex will have inappropriate advantage and influence. Such increased influence would have a significant danger to our freedoms and democratic procedures. The Americans have seen all of that. They understood the mechanisms that could put into jeopardy their country. And as for the current situation with the current military industrial complex of the United States, this is a result of the warnings that were given by Eisenhower. We are watching all the processes that are taking place in Europe and the United States that are being active not only since the start of the special military operation, but they have been brewing for many years, even before the operation and the conflict escalated. And that's what Minister Lavrov have been talking at length at the thematic roundtable discussion for ambassadors.
Let me remind you, I announced the same roundtable that will take place tomorrow. I think that we'll also talk about this one. through the it's not only about pumping up the Kiev regime, but also military supplies for terrorist needs. We see that under the pretext of events in Ukraine, there is a preparation for a bigger war. So these figures speak for themselves. This rhetoric also speaks for itself. The goals are clear, Russia and China. We see the growing profit for American military-industrial enterprises. A lot of military equipment is produced there. We see that the total militarization of any economy is a dead end. At the end of any conflict, the transition of industry, of militarized industry to civilian purposes is a very expensive one. The Second World War has proved that at that time. Under the circumstances, this American industrial and military complex and business enterprises at its core will inevitably apply the means that they used for centuries. They will start another conflict. Where? Under which pretext, under what flag, who would provoke it, what kind of a story would be behind it, it's hard to say. But the show must go on ideology, this bloody show that constantly continues with the same goals of making profit. We see this approach, this show, we've seen it over the centuries. On the one hand, I gave you some quotations. They're pretty old, a couple of decades old, and since then we see the capital concentration of the industrial and military enterprises in the U.S. The alliance effect on American politics is not limited. Coming back to your question, yes, indeed, we have to state that the so-called success of the American industrial and military complex, quote-unquote, will lead to dire consequences for both the U.S. and the world as a whole. Thank you. Do we have Reuters? Hello? Yes, that's Reuters. We have one question that the Russian president said during his visit to Kyzyl. I really like that Reuters doesn't even mention what president we're talking about. That's a very important thing that you said. Yes, Vladimir Putin said during the visit that Russia and China are allies in all senses of this word. If memory serves, in May, when President was giving a speech, Sergei Lavrov was giving a speech at the Council for Foreign Policy, said the same thing. Russia is aiming at a union, an alliance with the People's Republic of China. Can we talk about the transformation of the current strategic partnership? Is it a union? Is it an alliance? And how does Russia assess such prospects? You've mentioned the speech of the President of the Russian Federation, the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, but this approach is also used by other officials in our country, in expert community. Russia and China, are allies in all senses of this word. As far as legal perspective goes, that's a comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation. It's stated in joint statements adopted by Chinese and Russian leaders, which was held recently, and the Russian president is going to visit China soon. It's an interesting point. I could answer you in an easy way. Let's not play with words. But I think it's very interesting to look at these words and see the sense in them. The current Sino-Russian ties are an advanced cooperation compared with those back in the Cold War days. There is no bloc confrontation, nothing of this sort. They're not directed against third countries. There is no aggressive attitude. They're not directed against anyone. And it's a very important point. The leaders of our countries evaluate our relations as being at the highest point in the whole history, and it's a paragon of interstate cooperation in the 21st century. Well, just look at this evaluation. It's not just some kind of a legal evaluation. It's a formula. It's the reality and formula at the same time, which is considered by both countries as a paragon of an interstate cooperation. It's amazing, but it's unprecedented cooperation. They're based on a solid foundation of mutual respect, mutual trust, not interference in internal affairs, mutual support in issues touching upon core interests. It's security, values, territorial integrity. We are developing our bilateral cooperation and exchange in humanitarian issues, and we're interested in flourishing. We see each other as a priority external partners. Moscow and Beijing attitudes as far as principal questions of global order and key international problems go coincide or are very similar. Bilateral Sino-Russian Thai relation is a stabilizing factor in world affairs. We're calling to build a more just, a multipolar global order. And to our mind, our world is already multipolar, and this trend will only grow in the future. Our relations with China are not in a vacuum. They are adapting to new threats and challenges. There's new content to our relations under the current circumstances. We're interested in further deepening of our neighborly relations and mutually beneficial relations. Our relations, as I said, are not directed against third countries. That's a very significant point that I'm making, so that you would not say, well, you are talking about dual confrontation. I would like to draw your attention one more time to this one. The dual confrontation is a protective position, so to speak. It's not intention to aim against somebody else, to target somebody else, but this aggressive policy, this attacking policy is being formed. Why? What else do we do than to consolidate our positions, our efforts? To my mind, we have to, of course, analyze words, and they speak for themselves, but the most important thing is to analyze the contents of our relations and how they're developing, how they're implemented in practice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have Newsroom with us? Hello? Hello? Hila Rosen from News.ru. We have 3 questions. Our colleagues have already asked about this statement of the Armenian Speaker of the Parliament, but we have to clarify the words of the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan. He said that there are efforts that the statement from the 9th of November 2020 He noted that this understanding has something to do with the reality. According to his words, in reality, this responsibility is on Armenia. He quoted the 9th punct of the bilateral statement point. He said that the control over the transportation is being conducted by border officials of Russia. Does it mean that Armenia has a desire to denounce this document? If so, what could it result in? Well, I think that you have to turn with this question to the official Yerevan. Is it a desire to denounce the document, as you said? We haven't heard about such a desire, neither through diplomatic channels, neither in public space. But we've seen numerous attempts to manipulate with current documents, with the provisions that they stipulate. Well, today we play, tomorrow we don't play, things like that. But it's international law, and it's the document that was signed by both sides. And we refer to these documents all the time. These documents are being quoted, and these documents are being implemented, not by motion of a magic wand, but they're quoted by people who contribute, who sacrifice their time and their lives to turn these words into reality. One can say that it's an irresponsible approach to citing, referring to documents, referencing documents. It's a high price that the generation paid to make today's reality possible. Not seeing the reality, to just abandon what's written, to accept a new reality, the current situation. Those were people who was fighting for peace, and there were different situations, but everyone was wanted to have peace for their homeland. But we have to have respect for those who actually finalized those documents to reach peace and stability in the region. But let's not manipulate with words. Responsible politicians should responsibly work with documents that were outcome of the hard historical process. Well, please share with us your findings. If you ask this question, we have a second question. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico said that the international community should recognize the admissibility of wearing Nazi symbols used by the AFU. The politician said that he didn't like that the international community is talking a lot about fascism and Nazism, but is covering up the facts of Ukrainian Nazis wearing those symbols. Would Moscow address this issue on international fora? Well, there are some responsible politicians in Europe. That's a testament to that. That's what we are calling the words said by not a boy but by a grown man. This politician is surrounded by ideologists of this liberal dictate. They divide people, they divide their society, and this politician is in the middle of this neo-Nazi community, and he finds strength in himself to say the truth. We should respect that, and that's the truth that people are seeking, but many just pretend to see that. But that's the truth. That's the obvious truth that there is. You don't have